All right, moving on to Skinner, and let's do a quick review of Skinner. Skinner worked with what kind of animal in his labs? Okay, and we're talking here, he started out because he ended up working with many other different kinds, but you might have remembered that he started out working with rats. Okay, so B.F. Skinner, operant conditioning. Skinner was a bit of a radical behaviorist, as was J.B. Watson. And the two of them really believed that there was absolutely no such thing as personal freedom or free will. Okay, very, very differently than humanistic psychologists, right? They thought behavior is simply learned through the environment, that the environment rewards or punishes you for your behavior as you're growing up, and that you learn to behave in a certain way because of those punishments and rewards, and that you can't do anything about it. You have no free will. In fact, Skinner and Watson made the same kind of radical claim that if you gave them a newborn baby, okay, and you could specify, they could actually create the environment that would produce out of that baby either a contributing member of society or a criminal, just depending on how they set up the rewards and the punishments and the environment in which that baby was raised. Hey, well, of course, they made the claim, but they would never do that to a little baby. But very interesting, very radical. Hey, most behaviorists are not that radical. All right, so operant conditioning is learning through reinforcement and punishment, sometimes just said reward and punishment. Pretty much the same thing. And Skinner worked with rats, and what he figured out was that they learned that he could train them to do things using reward and punishment. In other words, he would wait until they did something that he wanted them to learn to do more often, and he would reward them for that. If you worked in his lab, that could have been a really daunting process, teaching these rats, if you were really waiting for them to actually perform the behavior. Because think about it, you could wait for days, right? Think if you're trying to train a dog to roll over, and if you actually waited till that dog rolled over to give it a treat, how long that would take. Well, Skinner came up with the Skinner box, and it's called the Skinner box. He actually loved inventing things. He did so long before he was a psychologist and was really fascinated with it as a child, inventing things as a child. So, he invented in his time the Skinner box. So today it might seem like very rudimentary kind of technology, but it was a really cool thing back then. And notice now that there's this lever on the wall, and the rat needs to press this so that this comes down. And when this little chute came down, this little rod came down, okay, that would cause the end of it, if you can imagine out here extending past the box, you can imagine the end of it would go up, right? And what it did was it delivered a treat right into this little food dispenser. Okay. I also did something else. Skinner had paper that would run through a roll consistently, and when this went up because of the rat pressing it down, it would also make a little mark on that paper. And because the paper was rolling through at an even pace, they could measure that pace, and they would have the timing down between responses. Okay, so he had this automated so that it wasn't such a pain in the butt for the research assistants, right? You could just put the rat in the box for an hour and then go pull it out, and all that would be done for you. But you can imagine that, waiting for that rat to just accidentally or in an exploratory way happen to hit that lever could take quite a while. So Skinner actually came up with something that he called shaping. And you might remember from Psych 101 that shaping is rewarding closer and closer approximations toward the behavior. So now I want you to think back to the situation of a puppy teaching it to roll over. So you might start by rewarding that puppy simply for being still. If it's young enough, you're going to have to start there, right? Or if it's a little bit older, just for sitting, and you can help that process too by kind of pushing their little rear end down and giving them a treat until they pick up on it, okay? And they do it without you having to assist them. But once it learns the first step, then you don't reward it till it does a second step. And again, you can help it, but that, when you say roll over, it's sitting. You don't want it to stop there and just sit when it's roll over. But you want to bring it to the next step, which is lying down, its entire body on the floor. Again, you can help it, but you say roll over, and then you don't give it a treat until its whole body is on the floor, and then not until it's doing it by itself, right? Without your help. And then rolling over on one side, and then rolling completely over on the back, and then over on the other side, and then you don't reward them until they've done the entire sequence and gotten back up, right? That is shaping. And that is really, really powerful, because with shaping now comes a lot faster learning, like we said, than just waiting for the animal to maybe accidentally do the behavior, okay? Once Skinner had this down, and he also had that Skinner box, now he's really set up in a way to collect some data on some other questions about operant conditioning. And one really interesting question is, once a human or another species of animal has learned a response through operant conditioning, will it maintain that response the best if you treat it continuously, in other words, every single time, or if you reward them intermittently some of the time, okay? Now, if you take, or you've already taken a learning and memory class, then we go further into different intermittent schedules, okay, of reinforcement. But for here, we just want to concentrate on that initial question. So obviously, if they're just learning the response, they haven't learned it yet, they're in the process of learning it, you need to treat them every single time. You need to reward them every single time. But the question now is, in order to maintain a response best, which kind of reinforcement should you do, continuous or intermittent? And I'll tell you that even psychologists were torn, kind of split about this to begin with. Because on one hand, it makes sense that if you treat them continuously, that might create the strongest association. In other words, keep the association between the reward and the behavior the strongest in their mind. But on the other hand, intermittent makes sense, because they might get tired of the reward, or the intermittent schedule might be an even more powerful motivator, okay? And that is actually what was found. An intermittent schedule, once you learn something, is even more powerful to keep you doing it. In fact, casinos make a lot of money off this one, right? Okay, so intermittent reinforcement works best to maintain that response. So we're going to look at some vocabulary here. But before I give you the questions, and you see if you can remember the vocabulary from 101, I want you to remember that there were 4 different types of consequences, okay, in possible consequences to behavior, okay, in operant conditioning. And 2 of them were reinforcing and 2 of them were punishing, okay? And each one, each answer is like positive punishment, positive reinforcement, negative punishment, negative reinforcement. And the thing is, the second word, whether it's punishment or reinforcement, you can rely on your intuition, right? So if it says reinforcement, it's always going to be reinforcing. If it says punishment, it's always going to be punishing. Okay? But for the first word, positive or negative, do not use your intuition. I want you to remember that in psychology, positive and negative mean something very different than they do the way we commonly use those terms. We use them as an evaluation, right? It means something good or something bad, and that's not true in psychology. In psychology, positive means that you're adding something or giving something, okay? Negative means that you're removing something or something has been taken away. And it's not just in intro psychology or in learning psychology. It's also true for across psychology. So for instance, in clinical psychology, they talk about positive and negative symptoms of disorders. And there's not such a thing as a good symptom. Okay? So when they say a positive symptom, they don't mean a symptom that is good. What they mean is something has been added into the psyche that isn't usually there. Examples would be hallucinations or delusions. Negative means something is missing from the psyche that is usually there. And examples of that might be like a lack of grooming. Okay? So now let's move on. So remember that. The second word you can trust. The first one you have to stop and think twice about. Here's the first question. What is the term for when after an animal, a human being or another species of animal does a behavior, as a consequence you give it something pleasant? Okay. And the answer to that is positive reinforcement. So if you give them something pleasant, that's clearly going to be a reinforcing, and you can trust that word, but you're giving something, so it's positive reinforcement. Here's your next one. Oh, as an example, that with little kids, what would work really well as a positive reinforcer is cookies. Works good for me too. All right, here's your second one, removing something unpleasant, okay? And the answer to that is negative reinforcement. So it's still reinforcing. Removing something unpleasant is certainly reinforcing, but now it's negative reinforcement because you're removing something. Here's your third one. Oh, here's an example. This little girl hates to do dishes, so if you wanted to reward her for a particular behavior, you could take away that particular chore for a day. Here's your third one, giving something unpleasant. Okay, what's your two-word term? Do you remember? And it is positive punishment. Okay, it's certainly unpleasant, it's punishment, but you're giving something, so it's positive punishment. An example of that would be a spanking. Okay, and the fourth one, removing something pleasant. Now that's still punishing, but that is negative punishment because it's removing something. All right. So again, if we went really fast for you and you didn't remember this really well from your Psych 101 class, that was a prerequisite for this class, then just contact your TA and they can give you some more practice on this so you can really feel like you've mastered it again before the test. But we're going to move on for now. Here's an example of that last one. Negative punishment, for instance, would be taking away biking privileges. All right. Now let me tell you something about Skinner before we moved on. He really started to get a lot of press for this because now he can train animals to do things you wouldn't expect animals to do, right? And he really is getting a lot of press for this. In fact, a zoo opened up in the United States at one point where they were teaching pigeons to do things like play a little basketball game, teaching animals to do entertaining things like that. Don't you wish that was still open? I sure do. Hey, but I'll tell you something, Skinner's getting a lot of press and there's a lot of news reporters who are anxious to talk to him. And he was talking to a news reporter once and he made a claim, that he felt with shaping, now that he had shaping on board, that he could teach a dog to jump up and touch a particular spot on the wall with its nose and that he could do it in 20 minutes or under. And he really didn't, he thought he was kind of giving them a hypothetical, but then he got a phone call that they were going to bring a dog over and they wanted to see him do this. And he talked to his grad student about this and he actually admitted being a little nervous. He wasn't quite sure whether he could do this in 20 minutes or under. And they brought him the spotted Dalmatian that you see in the picture. So he used shaping. And the first thing that he did, was he rewarded the dog for stopping by this wall. Now, the camera happened to be further away here, but he rewarded the dog for stopping by this wall. And so this next one actually looks like the dog has come up closer to Skinner, but actually it's further and it's right underneath the lines on the wall now. So it's even closer to that wall that he's rewarding him at that 4-minute point. And then at the 8-minute point, he's only rewarding the dog when the dog looks up. So not just looks at the wall, but looks up, see where its nose is pointing. Okay. Then he's progressing in shaping to only rewarding the dog when it jumps up. Okay. And then at 16 minutes, when it jumps up and is touching, one of these lines on the wall. So he's worked his way up to this line at this point. And at 20 minutes, he's only rewarding the dog when, look, it has to come off its feet, but it's got to touch its nose to that top line. All right, so Skinner could stop sweating at this point because he barely made it, but he did, and he made it, and it was a really cute article. And finally here, I want to show you some video footage. I told you that later on Skinner started working with other animals, and he even taught pigeons how to bowl using a little bowling game. So I'm going to show you some old, not very good quality, but some footage from that. Okay, you're on to me. Now you know what I did with my entire weekend creating this animation.